So tonight you're going to be hearing from Steve Dale, the Executive Director of the VSBA, myself, Nicole Mace, the Associate Director for Legal Services here at the Association, and Bill Talbot, Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Education. Our goals for the program are to increase your understanding of education finance, help you understand the statewide budget picture, understand upward pressures on tax rates. We're going to give you some talking points to discuss healthcare changes with the community should they come up in the context of your annual school district meeting. And Steve will go over some ideas for presenting your budget to the community. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to talk you through the poll questions we're going to kick off with.
Thanks, Nicole. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you spending a chunk of time with us this evening, and we will be as efficient as we can with the time. Hopefully, you'll find it informative and enjoyable. We wanted to start off with getting some information from you that would help inform the discussion that we're going to have. And there are three simple questions that hopefully you all can answer. And if you don't know exactly, all we're looking for is ballpark. So give it your best shot, and it helps us have a sense. So the first question we're asking is, what is the proposed increase in your town's budget for 2014 and 15? And that's town budget as opposed to education spending. In a minute I'll talk about my version of the definition of education spending. But if you know, since it's the budget that your town votes on, which authorizes you to spend money, what is your understanding of the increase? And the question is it actually a decrease? Is your increase 0 to 1%, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and over 4%? So, Carrie, why don't you go ahead and I guess we have the poll open.
57% of you have voted. 71% of you have voted. If you all want to vote now, then we can close the poll. We're still at 71%, 86% now, 75%. Okay, I think we're going to close the polls.
Okay. If you could show us what the results are.
The results are 14% have decreased, 43% are between 2 and 3%, and 43% are over 4%.
Okay. All right. Interesting. All right. This is just basic data that we can use as we talk further. So let's go to the next poll question, which is, what is the proposed increase in your education spending? And I assume that most of you are familiar with that phrase, education spending. Bill Talbot, who's with us, and I'll introduce in a minute, can explain it in much more detail. But in the essence of it is you've got a budget, how much money you're going to spend, and then there are certain things that you subtract from that are paid for by revenues other than the education fund, and those revenues get subtracted. So the amount of money you need to draw from the education fund to pay for your budget is going to be greater or lesser depending on those other revenues. So what is your understanding of your increase in education spending if you have been told the difference between budget and education spending? And again, the same categories.
Okay, we have 50% that's currently voted. If the rest of you could please vote. Okay, we're going to close the polls now. And here's your results. 43% are between 2 and 3%. 57% are over 4%.
Okay. Those numbers are very interesting because those numbers are somewhat higher than what our understanding is statewide, but we'll come back to that in a minute. So here's the final poll question. What is your projected property tax increase? Now, oftentimes those numbers get discussed as a cent increase. Sometimes they're a percentage increase, and I've heard many communities talking about both. You know, give it your best shot. What is your understanding of what kind of percentage increase that you're looking at for the coming year based on the budget that you've prepared?
Okay, we're currently at 63%. We're up to 75%. Okay, we're looking, oh great, we're looking at closing the polls now. And your results are 50% of you have had an increase of 3 to 5%, 25% of you have had an increase of 9 to 11%, and 25% are over 11%.
And that does match what we've been hearing anecdotally from folks around the state, where budget increases are quite modest, and but tax rate increases are substantial. I'm understanding that we have a little bit of feedback or echo coming, so we're going to fix that problem. But at this point, I want to move on. Hold on one second. I want to introduce, okay, we all set? Hopefully that will be better. I want to introduce Bill Talbot. Bill is the Deputy Secretary of the Agency of Education. He's been with the agency for a number of years, has had a variety of roles, including as a state legislator. He is probably the only person in the state of Vermont that really understands the funding system, and we are really privileged to have him here with us tonight. I asked him if he could just share from his tremendous knowledge base his version of both, first of all, what's happening from their perspective around the statewide budget picture. Secondly, to move on and talk a bit about describing the education finance system in as simple terms as possible, recognizing that you all are on this webinar to prepare to present to your electorate, and the average person in the state is very confused by our system. And then also to make sure he talks about this significant situation we've got this year where budgets are up in fairly modest amounts, and yet the tax rate increases are pretty extraordinary, causing a lot of turmoil in the legislative process. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Bill to take it from there. From here.
From here? Very good. We're back. Hi. Thanks, Steve. This is Bill Talbot. I am also known as the Chief Financial Officer at the Agency of Education, among many other things that we won't mention here. But so what I wanted to first talk about is, Steve said, you know, the big picture, what we're seeing so far. School business managers have been really, and school boards have been really helpful in the early days of budget preparation or budget voting, and sent us their preliminary information for their budgets. That is, once boards do the hard work of determining a budget, they have to submit it to the voters. They send us the numbers they're submitting to the voters, and we compile those, and almost all of the districts have submitted. You've probably heard that we projected a 3.8% increase in this education spending number Steve spoke about, and based on numbers we are looking at now, it's lower than that. It's just under 3%. So we were happy to see that, and I think that's reflective of the hard work everyone's doing and recognizing some of the challenges they face. So that's the big picture right now and what we're seeing. We will have what we call town meeting sheets to hand out to legislators, and we can also send them to your school business managers at your SU office that do have the particulars for your district. So they show the numbers as far as the tax rate and the income adjustment effect on everybody in their particular town. So that will be coming out probably in a few weeks, but shortly before town meeting, because that's what they're for. So now what I wanted to try to do is do the overview, the big picture on how the funding system works. Try something a little bit different in a minute. We'll see if the video camera here works on this little contraption I devised. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't. But we'll start off with what you propose to your voters is your total spending budget, regardless of the source of revenue. It does give you the authority to spend money. The law says that the voters have that right to determine the spending level. But once they determine that, the boards get to decide how that money is spent. So you have line item control once you get the budget passed. And as Steve mentioned, you will have some revenues available to cover that budget. On average, districts have about 20% available from various funding sources, whether they take in tuition students, capital grants from us, interest income, or maybe some federal funds. It depends. But it averages about 3%. If you have a lot of tuition kids, it can be a higher percent. But then the remainder, the difference we call education spending, and on average it's about 80% in a district, that comes from the education fund. I don't care how many students you have now, whatever that number is, once you get your budget voted, that difference, that education spending number, that's what the state owes you out of the education fund. It is not a per pupil funded system. It is a budget voted system. But per pupil numbers are very expensive. Well, maybe that too, but important is what I was trying to say. So here's what happens. We take that education spending number and divide it by your pupil count, and then we get your per pupil spending. Technically, it's called education spending per equalized pupil. What we do have in Vermont is a per pupil taxing system. So this per pupil number is extremely important with your two tax rates. You have both a homestead property tax rate and you have a homestead income tax rate. So we're going to go over to the magic wheel over here and see what to do. Once you get that number, once you know what your education spending number is, then you have a sense of what your tax rate's going to be. Now we tried this in rehearsal. Good picture of my stomach. So here it is. This is the magic wheel. And how close can I get to this thing? So
We're pretty close.
Okay. So
wait a minute. All right. This is the problem.
I'm not mic'd. All right. So here's what I'll try to talk so you can hear me. Excuse me, clear my throat. So every year the legislature will set the base parameters. So, and you've probably heard a little bit about them.
Hold on, just one second, Bill. It is probably helpful if you can expand your screen to make a full screen of the picture. It would be easier to see what Bill's referring. But he'll do the best he can to explain and to point out what the numbers are that you may have trouble seeing if it's still a small screen.
So every year the legislature will give you a number like your base spending amount. And it's not a block or anything like that. It's just a reference number for starting tax rates. The number they're talking about this year goes up for next year. I mean, this year it was $9,151 per student. Next year they're talking about $9,382 per student. And then associated with that are two tax rates. The base property tax rate for homesteads. This year it's 94 cents. Next year they're talking about $1.01. So up from 94 to $1.01. And the income rate this year is 1.8% of household income. And next year they're talking about moving it to 1.84%. First time that's bumped up at all. So you start there. And so these arrows on these words, tax rate or demonstrator. It's not a calculator. It's only for demonstration purposes. This number points to the 9382, this arm. This arm points to the 1.84 and the $1 tax rate. And it's a very, very simple device, but what most people don't seem to get, and you may be more sophisticated, is that what happens, as per pupil spending numbers go higher, so do your tax rates. And that's all I'm trying to show here. Your tax rates go up in direct proportion to your per pupil spending, all starting from the basis. Notice both rates go up, the income rate goes up, and the property tax rate goes up. Conversely, the lower you keep your per pupil spending, the lower your tax rate will be. And that's why I call it a per pupil taxing system. I don't care how many kids you have when I hand out the money. That's based on what you vote for a budget. But where we get you on the other side is what your spending per pupil is, and that sets your tax rate. The legislature establishes those bases through a lot of calculations from the tax department so that the Ed Fund will have enough money so that we can pay out what you adopt for budgets. But it's based on your per pupil spending. So now we're going to go back to the table here. I hope that was a little bit useful, but if not, at least we got a break. And I got some slides here in the last segment. is, can we get to a PowerPoint now? Let's see.
We sure can.
I've got about a 3-slide PowerPoint show, maybe 4. Upper pressure.
Let's see.
Did you guys? No, that's yours.
Yeah, I'm going to go into the next thing here.
You want to do those?
Yeah,
Let's do those.
Go do this first?
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Can we see those on the screen? So this sets the stage. So right away in this per pupil taxing system that's based on your per pupil spending, because of certain things that are built in this year, there's already an increase in the homestead property tax rate. So this year, the Ed Fund had some one-time money that was available to the tune of $19.3 million that helped keep rates down this year. Not available next year. There is the spending increases are going faster than the other sources of revenue that feed the education fund. So there's more reliance on the property tax. The grand list that those rates, the property tax rates apply to, is actually smaller, or projected to be smaller by 0.4% or 0.04%. Is that the point?
It's 0.04.
It's 400.
0.4%.
So it's almost flat, but it's not growing. So rates have to be adjusted accordingly. And finally, when the numbers I talked about, the $1 tax rate, it was based on assuming that spending was up 3.8%. If it comes in lower, as it looks like it will now, you may see an adjustment in that base property tax rate. So with all those things combined, if your per pupil spending next year is exactly the same as this year's, you will automatically see a 4.8% increase in your homestead property tax rate. So even if you level fund your per pupil spending, so that's why some of you are seeing such big property tax rate increases, even if you've done a good job holding down your budget, because you start off with a 4.8% increase to begin with. Just because the fund needs more money and doesn't have the support next year that it had last year from the surplus funds, and the grand list isn't growing. So that's the context. Now you need to know that be reminded that there are 2 tax rates, and it's the income adjustment is a little harder to understand, but it's based on a rate, but it's also based on your per pupil spending. It's only going to go up from 1.8% to 1.84%, so it's going up at a much smaller percentage than the homestead property tax rate. So that's favorable for the folks who are eligible for the income adjustment. Now, both of those increases are offset by the growth in the base amount. So when you go from 9151 to 9382, I said it right, I think, that offsets some of the increases. That's why it's only a 4-point increase, even though there's a 7 cent, which is like 7.6% increase in the base homestead tax rate. So anyway, you do get a little bit of help from the increased base amount. Now let's go to the PowerPoints. So this is what I call this upside, downside, and the good folks at the VSBA have played a little fun with the graphics there. And this is just trying to make people understand it's about per pupil spending that's driving tax rates. So next slide then. If a district's education spending is level funded and the pupil count is up, so you have more pupils, then your per pupil spending will be less next year. And this is the upside to this system. It allows districts, when they have increasing pupil counts, to spend a little bit more and not raise their tax rates. That's what we call the upside. The trick is, though, that most of you have never seen that since this whole system started. We've been losing pupils for at least 15 years now, and so everybody has seen the other side of this system, and it's kind of wearing on people. So let's go to the next slide. Again, the subliminal suggestion at the bottom: per pupil spending drives tax rates. If a district's education spending is level funded and the pupil count goes down, what do you think? The per pupil amount will be higher. And what drives tax rates? The per pupil amount. This is the downside. Tax rates go up. Most districts have experienced this for many years. So, but that's how the system was supposed to work. There's a provision in the law that makes sure that no district's pupil count, easy for me to say, will go down more than 3.5% in a year. And we've seen at least 70 districts, maybe 80 districts protected under this provision in any year. And so that's the effect of this. And over 15 years, it accumulates. So if we look at just K-12 population, we had 103,000 kids in 2002. K-12 public school population is down to about 80,000 now. That's quite a reduction. And so sooner or later, there's a break point when spending can drop. Let's see what we got on this next slide. Most districts have not been able to, have not been able to level fund education. All right, that's right. We've seen, next slide. Each year we see about 70% of the districts increase their education spending. So that's, it looks like we're going to be about 3% higher this year. A little less than our projection, but still up. And so if you have this growing spending, increasing spending, even though it's constrained and your pupil count is lower, you will have higher per pupil spending. And therefore, you will have higher tax rates.
Okay.
So that's the point of that conversation, and we'll open it up for a few questions if there are any.
So, Bill, thanks very much for being here. I've heard Bill do that presentation to the legislature on a number of occasions. And as I think it was Senator Tim Ash said recently, he thinks there might be, I forgot the number he uses, maybe 10 or 12 people in the entire legislature that fully understand this. As I say, Bill knows more about it than virtually anybody in Vermont. So I've asked Bill if he'd be willing just to answer any questions that people have. If you have comments or questions that you'd like him to react to, we urge you to raise your hand, ask them by voice, and Carrie will unmute you, or you can write a question in the chat box or the question box, and we'll read it here, and then Bill will respond to you. So we'll just leave this open for a minute and see what we have for any questions out there from Bill. Again, keeping in mind that within the next 3 weeks, you're going to be asked by folks to answer some of these kind of same questions, and it might be a good time to tap into his expertise. Do we have any questions at all in writing? Okay.
So crystal clear.
Yeah.
It's all perfectly clear. It was that.
Demonstrator.
It's that dial, that demonstrator that shows when you. Yes, that's. It's a powerful demonstrator. So we're all speechless.
Yes,
okay.
yeah, me too.
Okay. Last call for any questions for Bill. He's got a long way to drive home, and I'm going to let him go so we can move on to the other agenda items. Oh, wait a minute. I knew when I threatened to have you leave, we'd get him.
Okay.
So, Carrie, Nicole's going to read the question for the benefit of everyone and for Bill.
Okay. So, first question is, we know we have dropping pupil counts. Do we also have increased percentage of free and reduced lunch population and increased percentage of special ed?
Yes. No, and those are good questions, and they do. One of the things I'd intended to say at the opening of my conversation, in order to keep it simple, I tread it into the simplistic. But those are fair things. I think our child count for special ed is drifting down slightly, but not as fast as our general population, which is a question in itself. But that does put pressure, and it's hard to know about the free or reduced lunch numbers because there's been great efforts to increase enrollment in that, and so it was really, so there are more kids eligible for it now, but it's hard to know whether they weren't eligible before and weren't signing up. But because there's automated enrollment now, it all comes from numbers out of AHS. I don't know, but I guess if you look around and you read the news and you know, look at other economic news, you could guess that poverty counts are probably a little higher too. And we do know that is a pressure on spending.
Thanks, Bill. We have another question.
Yep. So I am from a very small town with declining student population and continually increasing costs. What can I offer in terms of a light at the end of the tunnel?
And that's a real fair question, and you're not alone. There are a number of people there, and I don't pretend to have any magic answers. It is what the conversations in the State House have been about the last few years with voluntary mergers. It's really tough to operate with fixed costs with few kids to spread those costs over. And and we know in Vermont sometimes there's geographic isolation, so you don't really have a lot of options. But that's one of the things. You have to keep in mind that we talk about paying towns and receiving towns, and really everybody pays in and everybody receives because it all comes to the state and all goes back to the districts. But most of the districts in this system are far, far better off with this funding system than they've been in any system we've had. It has made more funds available to more school districts than we've ever had in any of the systems before. There's no perfection here, and there's no easy answers to some of these problems. But it has produced more funding for many of the districts that couldn't raise it before. When you're a small district and you don't have many kids and you're declining, there are some hard questions you need to ask yourself as far as are we still viable and what else can we do?
I'll just, this is Steve Dale. I just would like to echo something that Bill said. My biggest fear about this year is that we have so many districts, and so many small districts in particular, that are looking at enormous tax rate increases. And the concern is that if budgets go down and if small schools are expected to figure out how to come back to their taxpayers with a further reduction, it comes directly out, at some point it comes directly out of education quality in those particular towns. So we are reaching a point, I think, where we have to look seriously at how we create somewhat larger entities that can have more flexibility to deploy resources in an effective way to make sure we can preserve quality, even at the same time that we need to do some shrinkage of costs. So these are tough discussions, but I think when you talk about a light at the end of the tunnel, there does need to be creative thinking about what are we going to do about this.
So there's been a decrease in the pupil count, but we've added universal pre-K. How does that affect our numbers or pupil count and funding for it?
Actually, adding pre-K has helped because it's given you more students, and our pupil count would have dropped faster, but the pre-K count is up, offsetting some of the drop. That's why when I talked about the enrollment, I used K-12 public school enrollment, where we're up to about 4,600 kids in pre-K now. It's almost doubled in the last 5 or 6 years. But generally, pre-K costs are a smaller proportion than the number of kids you count for them. So it generally has a favorable impact on your tax rates. Your costs for pre-K go up at a smaller rate than your pupil increase does in terms of pre-K. So it can help on the tax equation.
Is there any guidance from the agency for more effective and efficient delivery of special education? This is our largest area of growth and most seemingly impossible cost to control.
And this has been a conversation. I've been coming to Montpelier since 1987, and this question has been asked since I've been coming, probably before then. And the agency does have staff that looks at what we call high spending districts. There's a plan. We do help them come up with what we call a remediation plan, and we look at the highest spending first, kind of a triage, because our capacity to work with districts is limited. Our new secretary is working with us to try to generalize some of the advice we give to districts so that it can be available to all districts. So we'll be working, she calls it curating, posting it on, like a museum, you display it for all to see. And so we're working on that as well.
So this question, I think, is a follow-up to an earlier question about possible increases in the percentage of free and reduced lunch population and special ed population. Does it translate to increased concentration of tax burdening on communities with lower percentages of these needs, i.e. shifting costs?
Well, one of the things that we do when we count your pupils is we do count students in poverty, and it's not a free and reduced lunch number, but they count as more than one. And so if you have a higher percentage of those students, you will have a higher pupil count, and higher pupil counts hold down your tax rates. The question is it the right percentage? It's like what we use is, we used to call the program food stamps, but now it's something else.
3 squares.
3 squares. I asked Steve because he came from that world. But we get the data from Economic Services of the Department for Children and Families for each town and how many children they have who are in families that are eligible for that program. And that's the count we use for your district. And that does help. People have asked us if the 25% added count, so it's if a child in that category is counted as 1 1/4, is that the right percentage increase? And that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but it's it's good to keep asking the question.
Another one?
I think that's all. That is all that we have right now. This is your last chance to ask Bill a question before we move on. All right, thanks.
Okay. Bill, I want to thank you for all the support that you give school districts all over the state throughout the year. I'm always amazed that we have people that will send Bill an email and ask him for the most detailed answer to the detailed question. I don't know if he wants to be the answer person for every question across the entire state, but he has been enormously helpful to boards, individual board members, and administrators trying to sort out all these very difficult issues. And I appreciate him being here this evening and delaying his long drive home so that he could join us. So, Bill, thanks so much.
Hey, folks, good luck with your budgets. Thank you.
So we are going to do a bit of a transition here. Nicole is going to pick up the mic at this point and talk a bit about healthcare. Back in the fall, we did a series of meetings, regional meetings throughout the state, talking about what was happening with healthcare. And we believe now that boards throughout the state need to be fully engaged in understanding what's happening, what is likely to happen. As you may have noticed from some news accounts, there have been some challenges in the rollout of healthcare, both on a state and a federal level, which has changed a few of the dynamics. The bottom line is the reality is the same. We are still moving toward a dramatic change, and school districts need to be prepared. But Nicole and Laura Stories from the Vermont School Boards Insurance Trust have continued to work on this issue together with all of the attorneys who represent your districts in negotiations. And they've done some, I think, really good work at trying to stay abreast of what currently is happening and what we need to do going forward and how you might want to handle town meetings. So I'm going to turn it over here to share the most current thinking with you.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm going to just spend a few slides here giving you some talking points that Laura and I worked on together to help you be prepared to respond to inquiries from your community should they come up about the impact of healthcare reform on your budgets. We do know that in some large districts, you had to build new money into your healthcare budgets in addition to the 4.5% premium rate increases because of anticipated increases in coverage due to compliance with the Affordable Care Act. In those districts, we expect that you had done some modeling through VHI and Gallagher Benefit Services to predict what potential cost impacts may accrue to your district as a result of either new employees being eligible to receive health care benefits or spouses of current employees joining the district's health insurance plan because of changes that their employers are making with respect to health care coverage. So to the extent you have had significant impact on your budgets due to compliance with the Affordable Care Act, you're going to want to make sure that you get that information from your business manager and have that on hand. I'm not going to speak a lot about that tonight because it is so specific to particular districts, but you just want to be aware that, that's an element of the conversation. It's important that you be prepared to talk about health care because it's critical at this point to demonstrate that the board is paying attention to these issues. And it's important that your community understand that health care reform obliges all of us to look at current health care benefits and determine whether changes are appropriate, but that any changes to the benefit structure with respect to school districts have to be negotiated. And ultimately, the future of benefits is going to look different in your district for everybody, you know, across the state, really, particularly as we make progress moving towards a single payer system. But the pace of the change is going to vary district to district depending on the status of your collective bargaining agreements, the size of your district in terms of whether you can even enter the exchange at a given point in time. So the pace of change is going to be, as I said, depend on where you're at in your district. But it's important that you know in what size you are, what that means in terms of the timing. And so to the extent your superintendent or business manager can provide you with that information in advance of town meeting, that will be important. So the next few slides are going to be some pretty high-level talking points in case somebody says, you know, so what about healthcare reform? Are you looking at the exchange? You know, what does that mean for healthcare benefits? You want to be able to indicate that you know what they're talking about, that the Vermont Health Connect is the new state healthcare exchange, and that exchange provides a new option for school districts to provide healthcare coverage to your employees, and that those plans are designed to ensure out-of-pocket skin in the game for healthcare consumers and transparency regarding insurance coverage and costs. And most importantly, that the school district is doing its due diligence to understand and compare its plans, the VHI plans, to plans on Vermont Health Connect. VHI put out a primer in October of last year that does a really thorough job of comparing VHI plans to Vermont Health Connect plans. I'm not suggesting that you know, go through that if you haven't already in anticipation of town meeting day, but you want to make sure that you know that there are resources out there available and that the district is committed to accessing those resources as you do your due diligence to understand the new environment. It's important the community understands that the vast majority of our employees are in plans that have very limited out-of-pocket costs, which is different compared to Vermont Health Connect plans, but that benefits are determined at the bargaining table as part of total compensation. And current benefits were negotiated over time, so that trade-offs may have been made over time with respect to salary over benefits, and any changes moving forward must be negotiated. The critical point here is to say, as a community, we need to work with our employees over the coming year to determine what is the appropriate cost share for appropriate health care coverage in this new environment. And we have a fair amount of resources to support that conversation moving forward. I'm not sure that this year at town meeting is the time to have that conversation because it's going to be complicated enough given all the confusion out there about property tax rates. But it's important that you know that that's, and you can articulate that that's the conversation that's going to happen over the coming year. And that because we're talking about potentially significant changes to our employees, which can be stressful and which can take time, the board's committed to thoughtful planning, preparation, and open communication to facilitate that process. So you're not going to have all the answers for people. This is a rapidly evolving environment, and you are in a system bound by contractual agreements. The important thing is to convey to your community that you're paying attention, that you're knowledgeable of the various moving pieces, and you're committed to a transparent, thoughtful process moving forward. And if you have any specific questions or scenarios that are playing out locally that you feel like you need some more support in terms of how to either raise the issue proactively or just have in your back pocket some talking points, I'm happy to work with you, and I'm sure, and I'd probably bring Laura into that conversation as well, to provide you with some specific support. But for tonight, I just wanted to make sure people had a sense of the big messages that we think are important for boards to convey on this topic. I'm going to leave it. Does anybody have any questions for me?
Okay, seeing none. This is the way we
I
approach
see no
this.
questions right now.
Seeing none, and then we get 10 questions.
Last call.
Because many of you have been wrestling with this issue for some time, oh, here we go. We do have a question.
When does the grandfathering of VHI options expire? It doesn't expire unless you lose grandfathered status, which means from the board perspective, changing the employee-employer premium share more than 5 percentage points from where it was in 2010. From the VHI, from the plan perspective, they've basically made all the changes that they can to the plan design that they can make without violating grandfathered status. So there's very little room for them to make any changes moving forward. If you've, but assuming VHI doesn't make significant changes to the plans, which I don't think they plan to do, and you don't move beyond the 5 percentage points, you can retain grandfathered status indefinitely. The question, of course, is whether that's good for the district in terms of being locked into a plan that is increasingly out of step with state and national norms, and being locked into a premium share that's not favorable for the district.
And also, isn't there a time that will come sometime in the next 3 years where those plans will start to run into the what used to be known as the Cadillac tax, where it might become very challenging for a district to continue to justify preserving the grandfather? Yes.
And that's another question that just got raised. Can I speak to the Cadillac tax? I don't have the specifics on the Cadillac tax, but I believe it's 2018 or 2019. 2018, the excise tax, they're calling it, will kick in, and based on projections for VHI plans, it's expected that I believe, I think it's the JY plan for sure will hit it, and the VHP will hit it shortly after. So yeah, that's going to provide added pressure on districts to make changes.
And making changes is different. You making changes through negotiations is different than losing grandfather status, but there will come a time when it will become, I think, clear to everyone that it's time to end grandfather status. Just a small task to figure out how to get there. Is there one other question, or are we all set? Somebody asked, what is the Cadillac tax? I don't really, it's part of the federal health care. Basically, it's a mechanism to provide financing for the Federal Health Care Reform Act, so that if employers are offering health care plans that are overly generous, for lack of a more precise definition, they will be subjected to a tax. I don't have all the information about that. That's typically Laura's bailiwick. But if you have questions about the excise tax, you should contact Laura, and how it might impact your district, you should contact Laura Soares at Bisbit. Bottom line is that the district will need to it will cost the district additional money just to be able to offer those plans for no benefit for the employee. It's just extra money that will be paid to the federal government. So it's not a place where anybody wants to be.
Right. Again, part of the whole purpose of healthcare reform is providing universal access to affordable coverage, and it's very difficult to do that when you've got some people with tremendous benefits. You can't bring everybody to that level. So in order to both drive changes in healthcare consumer behavior and also to finance this mechanism, there's pressure being placed on healthcare benefit packages that are deemed to be overly generous, I guess. Okay.
Okay. All right. We're going to do one more change. We're trying to hit the preparations for town meeting from three very different perspectives. One was simply the information about finance. The second one was a little bit of conversation about healthcare, simply because it is likely to come up since it's always a big driver. And finally, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk with you a bit about a way of thinking about presenting your budget to the electorate. My thoughts that I'm going to share with you, and I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, are based on my 5 years on the Heartland School Board many years ago, and presenting on the floor of a town meeting on town meeting day, and secondly, presenting a number of budgets to folks in the legislature and elsewhere. These are general perspectives that I've learned over the years that I was taught by several people who were really exceptional at conveying a budget and successfully helping voters or the approvers agree to a spending package. So these are in the category of hopefully they're helpful. You can take them, take portions or not. And I'm also glad to talk to people personally. Last year when I presented some of this material, I had a couple people contact me, and we worked through the specifics of their budget. So we're glad to do that with you. So what I'm going to do is run this through as this would be my thoughts about how you might present your budget. I know there's folks on the call here tonight who have lots of experience presenting budgets, and you may have a whole different take on it, and that's fine. This is by no means the only way to do it, but these are some thoughts. When I presented a budget, part of the issue is to make sure that people understand that you, as the presenters of the budget, have a job to do, that you're there as trustees, and you're going to be assuring quality education for children, assuring that the district is operated effectively and efficiently, and assure that the community gets a great return on its investment. Sometimes we just take that for granted. Those of us on school boards, you know that, you live it, you attend to it, but it's important to say it because sometimes you have people who are going to be your voters who will say, well, this school board is, whatever they might say, whatever side of the budget issues they're on. And we think it's important to declare that your concerns are for, number one, for children, and number two, for the taxpayers in your town. And there are, we have our whole book about the essential functions of a school board. You might want to be prepared to talk more about it if necessary. I would then suggest that you talk about mission and vision. The big message here that I'm giving you is to start broad and then to work down to the numbers. The numbers are a way to achieve an objective. They're a way to deliver a product. They are not the end in and of itself. And I've seen too many school boards who do their presentation. They get up in front of the town and they start getting out the numbers and going into the budget. And the whole purpose of the endeavor gets lost on the folks in the audience, and they immediately hone in on whether you're spending too much on this line item or too much on that line item. So we would recommend that you start with mission and vision, that you exist to assure that every child receives a high-quality education. If you have a written mission, share it with the folks, and share it with passion, because that's why you do the work you do. That's why we have a budget in the first place. And be clear what you're trying to achieve in general and on into the future. Key indicators. One of the things people hate to do is spend money on something that you hear all the time. Well, we're a failing system. Some of our kids aren't doing as well as somebody else, so on and so forth. So be prepared to talk about how well you're achieving your mission and how you know it. Obviously, we have some challenges as a state in terms of tracking the success of our education program, but we are in business to achieve outcomes, and there are pieces of information that are available that would be in line with what are we trying to achieve. If you have information on graduation rates, test scores, offerings in your school, attendance information, post-secondary information, whatever you've got, be prepared to share it. And I would say again and again that be clear that as a state we don't have the level of data that we'd like, but we strongly support the efforts of the new Secretary of Education. This is, by the way, an editorial comment, to come up with a much more robust way of assessing how well we're doing, looking at a variety of information. And I keep saying to her, boards can't get that soon enough, because what we have is basically kneecap scores and graduation rates, and it's far too limited for the very, very challenging endeavor that we're part of, in the fact that we spend as much money as all the rest of state government combined. After the mission and the indicators, talk about the program. What are we doing with the money that our townspeople approve? Provide an overview of the major offerings for each school or age group. Obviously, you want to find the balance between giving enough detail for people to have confidence in what you're doing, but not overdoing it so that you get into a lot of minutia. But it's important that people have a sense for the program. I would do program highlights. What do you feel best about over the past year? So you're going to present sort of the breadth of the program, the kind of offerings you have, maybe student-teacher ratios, but then you're going to talk about program highlights. What do you feel best about over the past year? Major accomplishments, and also where are you headed? How does education need to change, and how will you get there? I think most of you are familiar with the VSBA, VSA Joint Agenda for World-Class Education. It's on our website. Feel free to make reference to that when you're thinking about articulating where we need to go relative to education. It's good to comment on program challenges. What are the biggest challenges you face? And perhaps more importantly, what are your plans to address them? Obviously, challenges that everyone faces, if they were mentioned earlier in the conversation with Bill Talbot, poverty rates. We have a lot of aging buildings, and the fact that we haven't had any assistance from the state in capital construction money for quite a long time has exacerbated a lot of problems. We're behind, you may be behind on technology advancements. Whatever your challenges are, it is always best to acknowledge them, not as a whine list, but as public officials who are trying to deliver product, high-quality education for every student at a reasonable price. If you've got challenges, it's better to put them out there, not get mired down, but to put them out there. If some of these challenges are driving some of your budget recommendations, it's important to mention that here. So, for example, if there was a public report in your district that said you're weak in math, I would mention at this point, yes, it was identified that we have some serious challenges in our math scores. We have really talked about that as a board, and you'll see in our budget that we have put forward some measures to address that concern, so that you're not. This isn't just a problem list. It's about the board's analysis of the issue and what you're proposing to do about it. If your challenges are around declining enrollment, which is what Bill was talking about earlier, and the fact that you've had to lose program options, if you've thought about what to do about that, rather than just laying it out that we had to cut our art programs or we had to reduce our music teacher from full-time to half-time, and therefore kids have fewer opportunities. It's important that your townspeople know about those challenges, but it would also be good to talk about what have you thought about that could help change that around for your students, including any things you've thought about relative to coming together with neighbors. Student census trends, another big piece of information that your town needs. Number of students served projected for 2014 with a trend line for the past 5 years and out into the future if possible. I think most of you get that from your superintendent's office. This is critical information. And as you know, this particular piece has a lot to do with the tax rate issues over time, as evidenced by Bill's little tricky gadget that he showed you on our camcorder or whatever. Special education trends I mentioned also. It's important that those be highlighted as well. The supervisory union budget. Most school boards in Vermont are part of supervisory unions. If you are in a single board supervisory district, you can sleep for the next minute and a half while I talk about this. But for most of you, the SU is an important part of governance structure in Vermont. The supervisory union exists to provide a more efficient way to assure that all children across Vermont get a fair shake. The SU ideally should be focused on whether all the children in that SU have equal education opportunity. And it is really important that each local board own the supervisory union budget as one of the vehicles for achieving their mission. Obviously, the budget is voted upon by the SU board and then is allocated to districts. But we have I think many board members in districts who feel some level of disconnect with the SU budget. And this is just a pitch from us that it is really important to own that budget for all board members, whether you're on the SU board or not, to engage with it enough to have a full understanding of what it is, where it came from, and what benefits it provides to your particular district. But it's really important not to view it as some distant process or product that you don't really have any investment in. Obviously, there's several major statements that you can make. The supervisory union serves the region. Board members from our district are part of the board. The SU budget is voted on and allocated to the districts through a formula that's agreed upon by the board, the SU board, and then highlight any moving parts. And this is more important now than ever. There's been a number of line items that have been growing at the SU level because of the centralization of special education, transportation, and others. If that's happening this year, ideally you would see costs increasing at the SU level and being reduced at the district level. The shift itself should be fairly neutral. So it's really important how all that gets described, explained, and presented at your annual meeting. So now on to the fundamental question of, with all of that as background, what does this budget accomplish? And I would not get too fancy with this. It's, you know, your budget you're about to present to them now. So you've told them what your mission is. You've told them how you measure yourself. You've told them what your program entails. Now you're going to describe to them what you hope the budget will accomplish. You're going to provide excellent education to X number of students. If you're going to expand pre-K, service to X number of special education students. If you're doing more with technology, you're planning to expand technology, whatever it is that your board has committed to in this budget, this is the time to present that to the community. It's also important to explain what this budget does not accomplish. So, for example, if you wanted to provide foreign language to every 4th, 5th, and 6th grader in your school, and that's something you're committed to working toward, but you were not able to achieve that, explain. This is all part of your engaging your community in your thought process that you went through as a board. We were not able to fund Ultimate Frisbee in the high school this year. We ended up with a student-teacher ratio of 24-1 in the 2nd grade. We would have liked to have brought it down a little bit, but that's where we ended up. It's I think, very healthy for a electorate to understand that you as a board are trying to achieve specific things, and you also are making choices about what you're not going to be able to do. Now we get to the actual numbers, and by this time, your time is winding to a close in the town meeting, and now you're putting up the numbers. And we would recommend that you list the major upward pressures on the budget in summary fashion. And I think the major upward pressures in most communities are fairly limited. Negotiated salaries, what's that number look like? Health insurance. We've talked quite a bit about heating costs, special ed costs for an additional 12 students, increased student enrollment, if you are so fortunate to have that, as some schools in this state do. Whatever the upward pressures are, this is the place to summarize them, and with some amount of money attached. So it's you need to look at all your upward expenditures and figure out how you would distribute those total expenses to the major upward drivers. But this is the summary where you're really letting the electorate know what's pushing upward. And then if there's also factors pushing up on education spending, for example, if you had a lot of ERA money, federal jobs money, other revenue sources, a major surplus from previous years that you spent this year, anything that happened this year in your revenue side that is going to push up the education spending amount that will drive taxes, I would list those on a separate sheet. So you've got your budget increase, your increased expenditure pressures, and then you've got lost revenues that will end up putting some upward pressure. If you did any major reductions to try to offset any of those upward pressures, it's really important to explain those. And I have read enough accounts from individual board members and in the media to know that we have had tremendous work done this year by school boards all over Vermont to try to keep budgets quite low. And I don't know if people heard Janice Garfield. I don't know if Janice is on this call. She had signed up originally. She was on the radio the other day on a VPR show, and she was describing, I think the number she gave was the reduction of 21 staff. That's probably on the far edge, but there have been staff reductions in many districts, and obviously it's critical that you take full credit for the work that you've done to try to find a way to keep your budget within reason given declining enrollment and all of these upward pressures that you just ran out. So you should describe what any budget reductions are and what the impact of those reductions is. And then I would just put up the budget at a glance. The approved budget from last year, the estimated actuals from last year, the recommended budget for this year, and the budget. Something, I didn't change these dates. This is the slide I used last year. So assume each of those dates is changed by one. But in other words, the approved budget for the year you're in now, where you think you're going to come out at the end of the year, and your recommended budget, and what the amount of the increase that you're anticipating. It is helpful to do a statewide context. We will have this information for you certainly within the next 2 or 3 weeks. Bill Talbot and the folks at the Agency of Education have been very cooperative with us. Our understanding is that the expected increase in education spending is going to be under 3%. Therefore, our assumption is that the average increase of budgets may be under that by some amount. We don't have those numbers yet. So school boards have really done a great job this year. Statewide, there's been a net decrease of students of about 1%. So this is all very much in the reasonable category. The dilemma we have is that we have 15 years of declining enrollments. And that's part of what people hold on to when they complain about the overall cost of education. But I will tell you, this year, school boards have really dug deep. And it's important, I think, for people to have a little sense of the statewide context. Specific budget increase will vary widely. We haven't, a number have decreased. You heard the numbers from the folks on the phone call tonight, wide range. Sometimes the big increase in a particular district is not the real problem. Some of those districts have the lowest per student costs to start with, and they may be the ones proposing the biggest increases. So it's, I think it's important to have that information in the back of your mind. Whether you use statewide data or not is really a strategic question for you to decide when you're preparing your presentation to the board, because sometimes it'll work for you and sometimes it'll work against you. But we will provide you with general data sometime in advance of town meeting, as soon as I have it from the agency. Bill talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to flash it back up here again, because this is probably the single biggest issue that I have heard from boards having concerns about, because people are saying, well, it's fine, you had your budget increase of 1.5%, and you've done all these things to try to reduce spending, but how is it that our tax rates are going to go up 18%? And I will just emphasize what Bill talked to you about, and I'm shooting this little arrow around, which you can see. Those 4 items at the top, if you spend exactly the amount of money you spent last year, your tax rate at the moment is projected to go up 4.8% before you start looking at your local variables. It's critical that your townspeople understand that. So if people say, well, how can this be? Part of the message is there's a statewide picture here, and they need to understand that's not something that, that your decisions will necessarily change. Obviously, the local decisions that get made are both your budget level, but more importantly, your education spending per equalized pupil. I think everybody's aware that if you spend 123% of last year's average per pupil spending, there is an excess spending penalty that affects your local tax rate, and there may be some things happening with your local common level of appraisal that can affect your local tax rate. And I'm sure that your superintendents and business managers have explained to you what the specifics are of your local picture. But I think this year more than ever, those top 4 items need to be understood and articulated by board members. Contrary to the comments the governor made, this isn't just about local spending. It's about some fundamental issues with the statewide picture. The second bullet was not highlighted by Bill, but I'm going to highlight it. There has been a gradual shift from broad-based taxes to property taxes. In 2005, 61% of the Ed Fund was raised through property taxes. In the coming year, 68% of the Ed Fund will be raised by property taxes, and that has a huge impact on what's happening to folks' property taxes. So those are issues that can get addressed by the legislature, but it's important that you not feel you have to own them on town meeting day. So make the case. We ask our voters to judge the budget on its merits and reasonableness. Is it providing an effective education? Is the proposed budget reasonable given the realities, numbers of students, upward pressures, etc.? And we urge voters not to vote on the budget based on the tax increase if it's much higher, but base your vote on the work that we've done and on what we're trying to deliver to the students in your community. If you've got concerns about the overall tax picture, we urge you to contact your legislators to urge some recalibrating of the system. But we have, the work that we've done as a board is based on, trying to do the best we can for our students within a reasonable cost. So
I have a question here.
Yes.
The last bullet on a statewide picture from the previous slides, that's going to be adjusted down to under 3%. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes. Yeah, the fourth bullet, they were talking 3.8% consistently through December on into January, but as numbers actually began to come in from school districts, they began to realize that it was looking like it's going to come in under 3%, which will decrease the 4.8 some amount. I tried to get a sense from people, if X, would it be Y? People were not willing to speculate exactly what the impact would be. So it may turn out that if the numbers come down low enough statewide, it may be that taxes will go up 4% or 3.9% before you even start to look at what you've done locally. But the most recent estimate for a statewide figure remains 3.8. The most recent official estimate is the 3.8%. So I didn't try to change it based on a kind of an informal assessment, but that number will change, I expect, before town meeting. Are there any other questions or comments about anything that I just ran through? So in closing, I'm going to I'll say two things to summarize what the points that I just made. Again, as an approach to presentation, a suggestion to focus on what you're trying to accomplish, explain what how well you're doing, explain what you're providing, explain in summary terms the budget that you put together to deliver the product that you've designed, and in that order, rather than starting with the budget and saying, "Here's our budget, now shoot at it." It's really starting with those other items. So that's our best thinking, and I hope that you have every success on town meeting day. We will do the best we can to try to continue to inform the broader public, the broader discussion, to create a backdrop that makes it more likely that folks won't be loaded up for town meeting to come in and send a message to the legislature. We can't guarantee an outcome in that regard, but we see that as part of our job, and we'll do the best we can to make sure that the public discourse is properly focused. So with that, let's go to our last slide. Whoops, too far away. Okay. I would ask that you complete the evaluation when you exit from this webinar, and tomorrow or within the next couple of days, you'll get some kind of a email from us that will include the materials that we had on the PowerPoint tonight, and there will be an unedited version of this webinar, I think, available also. And then within a couple of weeks, we have an edited version that goes up on our website that tries to hit the high points. So again, thank you very much for participating, and we wish you the very best as you approach town meeting.
Thank you. Have a good night. Someone asked a question. Can I ask a question of other participants?
Sure. Let's see if somebody, are they still here? Are people still on?
So if people are still on, we just got a question. Can I ask a question of other participants? Oh no, that person has left.
Uh-oh.
False alarm. Good night.
Who is?
Heidi asked, many of your PowerPoints are distributed as PDF.